We're taking a short break this week. We'll have fresh interviews with Australia's technology leaders soon. For now, enjoy this flashback to our discussion with New South Wales CIO Greg Wells.
Hello, and welcome to the IT News Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Hendry. As part of the 2021 State of the IT report, we've spent the past few weeks speaking to government CIOs from the states and territories on their digital efforts. Greg Wells is the New South Wales Government Chief Information and Digital Officer. We spoke to him about the state's journey to date and what lies on the horizon. Please enjoy. Thanks for joining us to discuss New South Wales, digital government progress as part of the IT News State of the IT report. New South Wales is widely considered a leader in digital, and it's mostly a product, of significant investment, a centralised services agency in Service New South Wales, and good leadership. And even before the pandemic, it was accelerating this transformation that had been underway for a number of years, and this sort of put it in an enviable position, when COVID-19 hit. So, to begin, how did the New South Wales digital government head start, if I can call it that, help the state respond to the pandemic?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think, even since our last strategy, we've seemed to be, lurching from one crisis to another. I think just after we launched strategy, it was bushfires and floods, pandemic, one, and gap, and then two. So, but I think you're right. I think there was a whole bunch of investments and assets within the government. And I think some of those are within DCS, but the clusters more broadly that have really helped. So, within DCS, the obvious ones you've touched on. So, the Service New South Wales Accountant app and the ability to build in, new things like check-in and grants and other things into service has been clearly a really important asset for us. And not just the fact that it's there, the fact that we're starting to prove identity within that process. So obviously that's one. Other things within DCS, obviously the NSW.gov.au platform, a whole bunch of common platforms, whether they be payments platforms or call centre platforms that we're able to scale for pandemic and grants and other things, spatial for border permits, common approaches to design systems, all that sort of stuff. So it does feel like we, while it was and still is a stack of work and people are working very hard and it is very stressful and people are very tired, there is a bunch of assets within DCS that really help from a whole of government perspective. But as I said, it's sort of been across government. If you think about in justice, the digital courts program, in health, the telehealth program, what the Digital Restart Fund is doing for regional schools. There was a whole bunch of things, as you say, in train that I feel like has really helped. Certainly a lot of things have had to be reinvented, but a bunch of assets that are there, and they're kind of the obvious assets and things and programs. But I also think the point we'd sort of got to in terms of relative maturity, in terms of, how we work across the sector, the way we work, we work in contemporary ways. And just having digital and data part of most conversations, some of those more subtle things that, you can't sort of see or they're not physical things, but those things have meant that we were set up ready to respond quickly when things needed to be responded to, right? So, yeah, plenty still to do, plenty of work still going on, I can assure you, but it was a good base.
Were there any practices that you adopted last year that have continued? I know one of the things that you were able to do very quickly was stand up the contact tracing through the Service New South Wales app. Are there any other practices that helped you to get that out the door so quickly that you've continued on into 2021?
Look, I think all of those platforms and things we had is probably the things that were expanded on. So even if we only had a payments platform that was being used for certain use cases, to expand it into grants or other things would be other examples. So any of those common platforms we moved or pivoted or refocused on the response would be one thing. Look, I think in terms of rapid prototyping and some of those things, we're already doing a fair bit of that, but it's probably less about, to be honest, less about prototyping and more about producing product quickly, real product that is live in weeks, days sometimes. Border permits would be one of those. Because the situation has been changing so rapidly, there's not time to prototype for a few weeks, test with lots of users, get feedback, and literally some of these things were days, weeks out the door, and then improved, incrementally improved as we got going, and I think that was important. What I think that has meant though is that often the technology is a little bit ahead of the policy space, and we're still seeing that, I think, to an extent, because you do have to react so rapidly. And in many places, this whole service design approach, which brings policy and technology and everything together to produce services, does work, but it has highlighted that there's still some work to do in lots of places for that as well, because in many cases the tech is working to start to build in anticipation of where the policy would go, and then correct as quickly as we can if it was wrong.
So you obviously had to build a lot of products very quickly. Were there any areas in which you had to delay initiatives to focus on those immediate needs?
I don't think in a big way. I think it certainly has focused certain things. We might have changed course a little bit to focus on something, whether that's what you use your My Service account and digital identity for, or where you look at connectivity, or so I think it's certainly focused some things. I wouldn't say there's big priorities that got left behind. It kind of feels to me like it helped in a different way. It helped highlight new emerging themes and areas we needed to focus on, because as people all started to work from home and things were being done virtually, there was a lot more online. It sort of highlighted, well, hang on, is this physical digital divide, is that right? Does that need to come together? How are we being really inclusive when we're all in different environments? How does connectivity is now more important than ever? So I kind of feel, Justin, it's a bit the opposite. I feel like even though all this pressure came and we were doing a lot more, it's highlighted for government in general the importance of digital and customer, and focusing on some of these new things that we're working on for a sort of major release of our Beyond Digital strategy as well. So it's been useful, I think, in that sense. Useful in the first sort of wave in 2020, where some of these programs that are being worked up were like, well, of course we need to get courts more online. But I feel like that's continued with other areas of importance that we need to focus on. So I feel like a bit the opposite. It's not been so much of a delay, it's been more of an acceleration, I think.
And you mentioned common platforms. That was quite a big part of the digital strategy that came out at the end of 2019, before the pandemic. And there was a lot of discussion about creating 10 whole of government platforms, things like payments, identity, like you mentioned before.
Yeah.
How have these progressed? Are any of these up and running at the moment, or they're still coming?
They're all at various stages of progression. I won't try and list 10, but it is a really big focus for us, because we can see that not only is that more efficient and can be done faster, right? But it's just a better customer experience if there's a common approach to doing things like particularly proof of identity and using your My Service account. But to pick up some of the others you mentioned, payments. So the customer payments platform scaled across service and now scaling into other places, and opportunities there. Consolidation of call center platforms and how they've been scaled and virtualized to make sure we can support customers. Lots of work on the buy.nsw platform. So, really streamlining and consolidating procurement from, a buyer and a seller's perspective. You got e-invoicing, e-construction. We've done work on hazards platforms. Spatial digital twin has been a big priority for us and is working towards something we want to really scale up. So lots of, that's before we even talk about the DAC and data.nsw. And so I don't know, it feels like there's a lot more than 10. I haven't counted them recently, but it is a focus, and it's a focus of the Digital Restart Fund too. There's a category that we really look to discover and find opportunities for common platforms to either pick up and try or to scale if they're working. So it's an important focus for us.
Yeah, you mentioned the Digital Restart Fund. Obviously, you've got quite a big pot of money there to play with over the next 4 years, I believe. 1.6 billion last year that was given in the budget, and then an additional 500 million this year. How is the government using the funds to accelerate the transformation that's happening? And also, how is it, I guess, using that money to reform the way IT projects are funded?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one that's been pretty important for us right from the commencement of the idea, because it did feel like the mechanisms for funding didn't match the contemporary ways of working and the way we want to do things, right? Which is kind of like we've been talking about in the response to the pandemic, get things up rapidly, make sure they're hitting the mark and incrementally improve them. And so that funding model with Restart, which is about getting access to funds faster, is really critical for us. And it's not really just about, the fund is specifically set up, as I talked about before, to really focus on specific things. So, we really talk about the 4 areas of the fund are around, common life journeys, about common platforms, what we termed legacy systems or modernisation before, I think was a mistake. It should have been called frontline systems or something a bit truer to what it does as a category, and then capability as well. So the fund was specifically set up to focus on the transformation of those 4 areas. So that's the first thing. Is it's not just a bucket of money that's for random things. It's prioritised around those goals. But I think the other, so as well as speed and the focus in those areas, it's also helped, I think, in terms of, prioritisation and thinking across government, what is important, what will have the biggest impact for customers. The mechanism about getting access to money quickly and getting tranches of funding ongoing is helping to de-risk some of the big programs we're seeing. And, some of the things we've kicked off are already delivering lots of value for customers. You think about, licensing was one of those common platforms, but it is also one of the things that's been funded through the restart process. And it's already out there starting to transform, not just digitising licenses, but transform the way customers interact and get things, and then reuse other bits of technology across government too. So it's been a fundamental component of why I think we're being successful, and one we're very interested to continue building on, because it's still I think not quite the right mix in terms of physical investment, building roads, etc., to digital, and I think that's again been highlighted by the pandemic.
The Digital Restart Fund is obviously a big component of moving away from, I guess, the legacy way of approaching IT projects. But I mean, how else is the state progressing away from the capex heavy approach? Are things like the public cloud targets that were set out last year helping to move the state in that direction?
Yeah, look, I think it's helping. I think we've still got a way, to be honest, to go on this one. It is true that the DRF has a split of CapEx, OpEx within it. So it does contemplate that a lot of these things are delivered as services and you consume services, not build assets. So it does contemplate that. I think the cloud policy is another mechanism. But, I think the fact that when we fund things through DRF, we're really looking and recognising that we want product teams that, see things from start to finish, and then there's an ongoing way for clusters to maintain those teams and the products they support. So, but I do feel like it's still a bit of a way to go, because I wouldn't say that at this stage, universally everywhere across government, that we think of ICT as completely part of a business response and a service that we deliver. And if we do think about it like that, it should be, that shift to OpEx will become greater. So, progress, but still lots more to go, to be honest, in that space, Justin.
I want to talk a little bit about online services as well. And I know obviously this is an area where you can't necessarily provide as much information because you're not the head of Services New South Wales. But, New South Wales is currently got about 80% of transactions available through Services New South Wales. And, whereas about 2 years ago, this was about 74%. Why does it not expect to reach the target of 80% until sort of 23, 24? Why is that 1%, that last 1%, the last stretch, taking so long?
I think what we're doing there is resetting a lot of those programs around the priorities across, so if you look at the Premier's priorities, government made easy, telling us once, a whole bunch of those priorities, which to be honest is the feedback we're getting from customers on the most important things to do, on the highest volume transactions. To be honest, just on new transactions that have come up in the past 18 months, things that we would not have envisaged around grants, support and other things. Some of those priorities will shift and move. So I think it's less about, a percentage of transactions, which, for which the denominator is going to be shifting and has shifted rapidly. And it's more about making sure we pick the right things to deliver to customers. So we're constantly looking at, how we prioritise and what we set up to deliver. And, the past, particularly 6 months, but 18 really has certainly highlighted that.
So it is partially due to the shifting focus towards the tell us once type functionality that is becoming increasingly important for, I guess, all governments across Australia to really grab onto.
Yeah, that's right. So the government made easy programs, tell us once initiatives, all of those things, certainly, that's the feedback we get from consumers, customers, that that's what they really want from us. They want to be able to trust our services, and they want to be. It just should be really simple. It should just be easy. We should be just really easy to do business with. That's from an individual's perspective, but increasingly, and again, what we've seen in the last 6 months is from a business's perspective as well. So taking a business lens, like we're taking an individual's lens, is probably the other emerging priority for us. I think of all the things that's clear in the strategy is, this sort of new release of the strategy we're working on is, digital has got a really big part to play in accelerating the sort of economic recovery of the state. And the business dimension of that is a big part of that.
And obviously quite a big component of Tell Us Once, I guess, is digital identity, something that's on everyone's mind around Australia right now. What are the government's plans around here? Is it progressing a digital ID solution that will eventually link in with the federal government's scheme?
Yeah, we've always been working to align with the TDIF, with TDIF. But I think also, what that means for New South Wales, has and will be anchored around the Service New South Wales account and how that works for customers to prove their identity, and then to link in with other sources. But just, I think the evolving component here for us is not just about that account and proof, but it's about what you can do with that account and that proof. So it's the credentials and things that you're entitled to do as part of life journeys and events and other things you want to do with government and outside of government, to be honest, as well. That's the most important bit in terms of that digital identity journey for us. So yes, it's about identity, but I'd also say it's the combination of what you want to do with your identity, credentials and other services. That's the key priority for us, I'd say, moving forward.
And does that mean that New South Wales will look to introduce a scheme like we have with the MyGov ID, which is at different levels of identity verification? You've got like a basic level, which doesn't require very much personal information. Then you've got a very strong level, which requires all sorts of documents and also a facial verification test. Is that kind of the approach that New South Wales intends to take?
Yeah, so those proofing levels is what they're referring to. We're aligning with those. There's been a couple of new levels introduced over the past, I think, year or so. 2+ and a few levels that we're aligned with as well. But yeah, that's exactly the sort of pattern we're following. I won't get the numbers exactly right, but of the 6 million Service New South Wales accounts, I think up to above 4 million now are proofed to what we call proof level 2, which can be stored and reused to do a lot of transactions. And progressively we'll move that proofing level up digitally as well. But yeah, those proofing levels are things we're aligning completely with.
I wanted to turn now to cybersecurity and I guess the last year's phishing attack against Service New South Wales, which was a very big event. I'd say one of the biggest for a state government agency. The information of about 103,000 customers was accessed. One of the reasons it was made worse was the fact that Service New South Wales didn't have a two-factor authentication. There was a recommendation a couple of years ago. But in the aftermath, the government has introduced a number of measures that I guess may not have been introduced otherwise. Can you take us through what kinds of things were introduced?
I'll talk, I think, more generically about the cybersecurity uplift program that's in place rather than the specifics around Service New South Wales, who have made a heap of progress in terms of strengthening their maturity and their capability in this space. But I think the first thing to say is clearly the threat, the cybersecurity threat is continuing to increase in terms of frequency and scale and sophistication, severity. It's probably one of the biggest focuses that we have across government. So the investment we've made through Restart and then ongoing through Restart has been important for all agencies to start to build higher levels of maturity. We issued a directive last year in terms of awareness and training that sort of mandated cybersecurity awareness training for all government staff. So that's in place and is working through. So there is a heap of work across every cluster to look at the cybersecurity policy that's in place. That's 25 mandatory requirements, which include the Essential 8, and a big focus on lifting maturity across that range of things. Not just technical things, the Essential 8, technical controls, but everything from roles, responsibilities, response plans, governance, and everything that goes with cybersecurity, because it is really not a technical, just a technical issue. It's a risk problem that we need to address.
And there's a parliamentary report about to come out in relation to cybersecurity. Is there anything you can provide there? I know it's obviously a couple of weeks away, but what are the kinds of things that New South Wales will be looking to introduce in response to that?
Look, I think it's continuing the strategy that we've got in place, to be honest. It's just building more and more maturity into that process. And I think, I think one thing here that's I think also important is there's a bit of a narrative around you got to be able to stop obviously we're working on everything we can do to prevent incidents, but I think as equally important as that is your ability to respond and recover to incidents, because they will occur, right? It doesn't matter what organisation you are or what maturity you have. It's equally about that. So that's why I talk about those mandatory 25 requirements of this across the spectrum of prevention to response. There are things that people are putting in place to make sure not only are we protecting information and preventing attacks, but we're also ready to respond with plans that have been exercised and tested and all of those sorts of things too. So the investment we've made through DRF, the $240 million originally, and then another component which we've ring-fenced for small and independent agencies in this last round, will help us with just continuing those technical safeguards and implementing the cybersecurity New South Wales policy really.
And also I guess that includes the uplifts that are happening across I think there's one in Service New South Wales, obviously there's a big one happening there. I think Justice and Police also have one. Where else are these uplifts occurring in government?
Yeah, so every cluster now, Justin, has access. So when we ring fence cybersecurity funding as part of DRF, that was based on an estimate from every cluster across government, every major cluster, to build uplift plans and execute those over the sort of mostly a sort of 12 to 24 month time frame. So that is now started across every major cluster, and then in addition to that, we're looking now at small and independent agencies as well. So that is now happening across government everywhere.
And as part of that, I remember there was specific funding for cybersecurity in New South Wales. Is it using that funding to, I guess, build cybersecurity talent within that arm of DCS? And how is it building talent more broadly across government?
Part of that funding was to confirm, Cybersecurity New South Wales function. It is looking across government, I said, in terms of building basic awareness and quite an executive awareness to cybersecurity, as well as quite technical skills within the public service. It is working with industry in a big way. If you reference and have a look at the Cybersecurity New South Wales 2021 strategy, which we've just released, probably half of that strategy is about working with industry to build skills, and the sort of skill gap we have in digital in general, but specifically in cyber. There's a range of programs we have in place with TAFE. There's cadetships, traineeships. There's a whole bunch of everything we can think of just to try and make sure we build skills in this area. We are doing.
And it also seems like you've been trying to build talent more broadly, even outside of cybersecurity. There's been a couple of programs recently, I think within, again, Service New South Wales and Transport for New South Wales, where a lot of talent, IT talent, is being brought in-house to build out a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about. How important is that to the state's transformation?
Justin, I think this is, if you pick a thread through all the conversations over the past year, this is probably the one. The shortage of talent in New South Wales and Australia generally, the competition for talent, across everywhere is probably the thing that's, most on people's minds, because they can see the demand and what we need to do, and they can see the people we have and how much work we're all doing. And I think, bringing some of these programs together and things that, as you say, transport and service are doing great jobs of, and scaling those things up will be critical for us. There's no question.
I'd like to end on leadership, and it's obviously something I mentioned right at the beginning, but New South Wales has some of the most invested senior executives, I'd say, and one very enthusiastic digital minister. How important has this buy-in been for New South Wales' digital journey to date?
It's obviously critical. I mean, I think to an extent you can't be successful if you don't really have a lot of passionate and bought-in senior leaders, and we're very, very, very lucky to have that. That goes, with the Secretary's Board and critical. Our own Secretary, Emma Hogan, Tim Ridd, and Mike Pratt. All the secretaries are very bought in and give us the time and understand this stuff really well. We have a great set of senior leadership teams across government that collaborate really, really well. But you are 100% right. A passionate and informed and driven minister is critical to this, and it has been an ingredient that's that's really been critical to our success. There's no question.
That was Greg Wells, the Chief Information and Digital Officer for the New South Wales Government. And that's the podcast for this week. We'll be back with an exciting new interview next week. Until then, you can check out the State of IT report and catch all the latest headlines in Australian IT over at itnews.com.au.